Treasure Coast Crime Stoppers works for you. That's 1-800-273-TIPS. Funded by the Office of Florida's Attorney General.
You are listening to WSTU, Stuart, Jensen Beach, Hope Sound, Martin County's Heritage Station.
It's time now for the Casey Ingram Show on WSTU. The opinions expressed are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WSTU. WSTU does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WSTU. It's time to call in with your questions and comments at 220-9788, 220-WSTU. And now, here's Casey Ingram.
Welcome back to the second half of the show. We just had Representative John Snyder in the studio, and next we're going to have the mayor of Stuart, Commissioner Troy McDonald. And a lot of updates. There's so much happening with the city of Stuart. I'm just excited to have this interview with you. And many of you know that Commissioner McDonald has been a repeat guest many a times over the years. So we're going to talk a little bit about the change of direction here recently with the city of Stuart. The election kind of changed everything. The people spoke, and here you became mayor. And first question, will you be mayor coming up the next year as well as you were supposed to be?
Well, that's up to the rest of the commission. I would assume so, but at the end of the day, at the end of the day, it's up to the rest of the commission. But I don't see any reason why I wouldn't be.
This might be, if it wasn't, it would be probably one of the shortest terms ever, right, as a mayor?
Well, it's funny because one of my previous terms was this is not the first time that I've taken over midterm.
Oh, it isn't? Okay.
No, I took over midterm in 2017 as well after a resignation. So.
Oh, yes. Okay. Before we get into all these updates, I have to thank my sponsors. And the first one, public service equals public trust. This is a reminder to vote for Raymond Denzel. Ray Denzel will work for all the people of District 86. Ray Denzel is a problem solver and will always have an open door for you to reach him. Ray Denzel won't just vote the party line. Ray will vote for what makes sense for the people. Early voting begins October 26th, or vote for Ray Denzel on November 8th. Political advertisement paid for and approved by Raymond Denzel, Democrat, for Florida House of Representatives, District 86. Also want to remind everybody that it's still hurricane season, and the best place to keep your boat in Martin County is Indiantown Marina. It is such a safe spot. They're inland on the Okeechobee Waterway, and if you make sure just call, reserve your spot, because once a storm is named, I can pretty much tell you you won't find a place in this town. And you can give them a call at 772-631-3272, 631-3272. And the good part about it is they are also a do-it-yourself and full-service boat yard. So if you need any work done on your boat, that's the place to go, Indiantown Marina. And finally, the best-kept secret in Martin County is the Fish House Art Center. You can look it up online, thefishhouseartcenter.com. It's down in the Pocket in Port Salerno. And literally, there is something to do for everybody. They have a Airbnb, art gallery, boat charters, marina, a craft and creamery, which has craft beers, wine, and 24 flavors of ice cream. You can rent paddle boards, all kinds of fun stuff to do out there. So look them up, the Fish House Art Center in Port Salerno. All right, Troy, so let's go back here. So we had an election here in August. The commission changed, and the election was about growth and no growth, really, for the multifamily.
That is a big part of it. Certainly, there's a lot more to the city of Stuart than development, but the election, the candidates seem to have focused on that won, and so certainly, as Representative Snyder said, elections do have consequences.
They do.
So we're starting to look at a few things. We'd starting to see some change. There was a 2-year, as you know, I was on the commission for 8 years, and then there was 2 years where I was not.
Right.
Took a little vacation, so to speak.
Right.
Not necessarily by choice, but, but I decided to come back.
You're back.
And during that 2-year period, about 2,400 residential units were approved. Mostly multifamily. In the city of Stuart, there's really not much left as far as property that's appropriate for anything other than far as residential, far as multifamily. There just isn't much left. And then after I came on, two apartment complexes. One was part of that. There was one that I voted on my first meeting that had been through 4 or 5 meetings before it got to me, and I did vote on that one, but I don't count that one as much because it had already gone completely through the process.
Right.
And the land use change had been done, and it was at that point it was a vested right. But there are 2 that I did vote on. One included the Costco property and one on Central Parkway that were of the larger, would be considered the larger apartment complexes. One's under construction and one is in litigation.
Right.
So what we're doing right now is we are looking at we've approved what they call a zoning in progress.
Okay.
And a zoning in progress basically freezes the code for 90 days. It can be renewed one time to a total of 180 days. And during that period of time, what we're saying to property owners is that here's what the code is now, but if you come in and apply for an application, it actually may be subject to is any new code that's created. So it's kind of a warning to buyer beware kind of thing. So it just kind of puts a pause on everything.
So the zoning in progress, you're not going to approve anything because you could actually change some sort of zoning on those properties.
Yeah, and if we do change the zoning, any applications that came in during that period would be subject to the new code.
So, for example, I was listening to your last commission meeting. I know with Commissioner Collins, something might be 15 units an acre right now zoned for,
Mm-hmm.
but it has a conditional use of 30 units an acre, which typically it goes to 30. You may change the zoning to 30 units an acre, or you could even change it to 10 units an acre. That's what's going on right now.
Well, it'd be unlikely to go to 10 just because of Bert Harris actions. So we still have to follow state law and be conscientious of our actions. We also have to look at our comp plan, look at state law. It's not as simple as just saying, I want to do this. So, and it's a process. And we're going to have a workshop on November 2nd.
I was going to ask if you're going to have public workshop.
Yeah, so we're going to have a workshop on November 7 where we will be presented based on conversations that staff has had with individual commissioners, and also them doing their own work and being planners, what they do. Mm-hmm. They're going to try to come up with something that they think that is appropriate. And for me, when we get into this, I was fine voting for the zoning in progress because, again, it's just a pause at this point.
Now, Commissioner McDonald, with it, is that only on parcels that are zoned for multifamily and residential, or is it every parcel in the city? Well, it also
includes commercial. So different when you get into the different land uses, commercial allows a certain percentage of it to be have residential. Industrial actually allows a certain percentage to have a residential. So it's going to cover I believe the zoning in progress is, and we're going to be looking at all of those. But again, like I said, we're going to need to look at what the comp plan says, and we have to take into consideration long-term planning, and also the inventory. For example, right now, it was provided at our last city commission meeting, there's currently only 2 acres left zoned multifamily in the city.
Wow.
So now we have other zoning categories and other land uses that allow multifamily.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's land use changes. And sometimes land use changes are appropriate, sometimes they're not. Recently, at our last meeting, there was one that was not approved, a land use change. There was a motion for it. It died for lack of a second. And that was to change a piece of property that was originally zoned residential. It was part of a condo complex. It did not get built. It stayed multifamily residential for several years. Then a church built on it. And a church of a certain size could be on multifamily residential. Then the church decided to expand. So they wanted to expand, so they went and they changed the land use to, I think, institutional, whatever it was for churches. I believe it was institutional. So But then they decided not to expand, and they sold the property and moved away to some other location
Okay.
for whatever reason. And why they did that, we're going back almost 20 years when they sold the property. So then it got rezoned commercial right before the recession hit.
Okay.
So property now has sat vacant. The church was torn down. Property has sat vacant for, I'm going to say 15 to 17 years, somewhere around there.
Okay.
And someone came in and wanted to do a rezoning to multifamily to put townhomes.
Okay.
So decision was, and then they also had, if that would have passed, we would have went into the zoning side of the hearing, which it did not, which is the, and it didn't fail either. It just died.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's a little bit different from a denial versus.
So they can come back, in other
At
words.
some point, they can come back and so if something changes, for example.
Okay.
So then they came back in and. So then the hearing that we did not have would have been on the zoning where they were doing a PUD asking for 12 units an acre. Under where that was located, under multifamily, they could have done 10.
Okay.
So they were looking for 12. They wanted to get to 60 units an acre, but it doesn't matter because the land use didn't change. Back several months ago, there was a request by Meritage to change the land use on a piece of property on Commerce and Indian Street.
Okay.
To do, again, like 60, it was 86 townhomes, I believe, they wanted to do. I actually made the motion to turn down that land use change because that one I felt was inappropriate to convert that property from commercial to residential because where it was located over in a very commercial industrial corridor, we only have so much land that you can do industrial. It's also on a railroad track, so right on the railroad track, so you could put if somebody needed a rail spur, it would be possible to work with the
Okay.
FEC to get a rail spur. There's not very many places we can do that.
Okay.
And so looking at the balance approach of land uses, to me that was an inappropriate land use change. And ends up a commercial business purchased that property to expand their commercial business right after that land use change was turned down. So I think that is one of those just how those things work sometimes. So that's where we're at on that. And so when we get into the workshops, we'll. In the way I'm going to evaluate is I'm going to be reviewing the comp plan, see
Okay.
what the goals and objectives and the elements of the comp plan say. I'm going to look at state law, see what it says, and then like many things, I think we'll make the sausage in the meeting and we'll come up with what we're going to have. I think we're probably going to come in with 2 or 3 different ideas of where we should be. And where we land.
And again, that's November 7th?
That's
you said?
November 2nd is
Second.
the workshop.
Okay. November
So
2nd.
once we go through the workshop process, then staff can start putting together the ordinances to make any changes.
And for the public, if you want to attend cityofstuart.org, you'll certainly have that public
Yeah.
workshop
Yep.
publicized.
Yep, City of Stuart's website, and it's November 2nd, I believe, at 4 p.m.
November 2nd at 4 p.m. Very important. And this could be some changes for the city of Stuart. You may end up keeping things the same. I mean, it's just,
I
this is
think
what
there's
it's all
going to be
about.
some changes. I don't know how much, because I was sitting outside listening to Representative Snyder,
Right.
and it's tough going after him because he's so good. But he was talking about, and you were talking about affordable housing, and housing is a really serious issue.
Yes.
That is really in many ways left up to local government, and we are having. I hear time again about workforce housing,
Right.
And I've talked to I've talked to employers that have talked about considering building apartments for their employees. I've heard about school systems around in the state looking at that. So we have to balance all of these issues with the needs of our community, with the desires, with desires of voters, but not everybody. There was an election, but not 100% of the people voted for one side or
Right.
the other one.
Right.
So there is a mixed view, and we have to just make sure that we are working towards the best outcome for long term for the city.
Can the state intervene on your zoning rules? For example, what I'm getting at is I know the county just had a rural lifestyle amendment, comp plan amendment, and they said we need to do this because if we don't look at our population, the state can come in and dictate changing our land use from 1 unit per 20 acres to 1 unit to 1 acre, whatever the state deems.
Well,
Can they do that in the city?
I think they could. In other states, California, for example, the California state legislature eliminated single-family zoning.
Wow.
So, and they weren't the first state to do that. There's other states that have done that. I believe there's cities have done that. City of Gainesville actually has been looking at, I believe, was eliminating single-family zoning.
Wow.
And so there are now the state so far is not taking a positive light of that, but as we see 1,000+ people a day moving to the state. And as we look at our population projections being 26 to 28 million by 2030, that is going to start dictating what the state may jump into. I hope they don't, and I think the best approach for us is to have a balanced approach and not an extreme approach on anything, because I do not support the state coming in and telling us what to do, and I think the best way to ensure that happens is to take an extreme approach on anything.
Absolutely, and it's tough. Lisa, I appreciate you tuning in. She said we are saturated here. What a joke a growth mindset is, and it's something that really for the city really have to take into account. I mean, that's everybody's screaming about the traffic. There's just so much out there right now,
and there is a lot of traffic. But I want to remind.
But they're also screaming about the cost of rent.
Well, there's the cost of rent. There's the lack of housing. But as far as the traffic, so. I've heard a lot of talks about traffic, and I also serve as chair of the Martin County MPO.
Okay.
And traffic is one of the main things that we look at. And I will say that the vast majority of our traffic issues are created by the county north of us. In fact, I was in a regional transportation meeting last year, the Treasure Coast Transportation Council, which has two representatives from Martin, 2 representatives from St. Lucie, and 2 representatives from Indian River County. And one of the representatives from the city of from the county of Port St. Lucie, TPO, one of their school board members up there and former city councilman in Port St. Lucie, said the city of Port St. Lucie's goal is to be 600,000 people by 2030.
Certainly that's going to impact us, and that's really hard because you have to deal with that traffic even though you're not in control of the population that's increasing.
Go look at Green River Parkway and US 1 going north, and look at back by Murphy Road and Becker Road and going in and out of Port St. Lucie so much traffic is because traffic is a challenge in the first place, but we are getting impacted by places that we have no control over.
And St. Lucie County just expanded its urban service border too. I think by 30,000 acres. I think it was.
I believe that. And I believe that there's like 60,000 new acres that are getting ready to develop in the city of Port St. Lucie, and they're developing at a rate much higher than we are. At a density
Definitely.
level. I mean, just at an incredibly high density rate. And so we have that challenge, and that is a huge challenge that we're having to deal with from a regional perspective. If you look at some of the biggest traffic capacity projects that Martin County has done in the last 20 years. Green River Parkway, for example, that's really because of St. Lucie County residents.
Okay.
Citrus, up to connects to Port St. Lucie Boulevard, really trying to get them off St. Lucie County residents coming into and through, because don't forget, they don't just come into Martin County, they actually go through Martin County going to Palm Beach County.
Right.
So that's something that we definitely have to deal with.
It's really a big problem. And, as we're sitting here talking, Commissioner McDonald, I was thinking, I've had you in here so many times over the years, and always our topic is about the water.
Yes.
And, here it is. This year has really changed, and it's really...
It really has. And, just looking at the elections, I think one of the reasons why Commissioner Matheson did not fare as well is because the water was so good. It wasn't an issue. That was it was a very strong issue. If the river would have been green, we might have had a different outcome.
Right.
But it really has, all these projects that we've been working on for the last, fighting the fight. We've been fighting the fight. Trips to Washington. We rode on the plane together.
We
up
did
to
back in 2013.
Yeah. So, and I don't know how many trips to Tallahassee, Washington, and out to the lake, the Toxic Trail, ultra marathons, and all of these things that we've done to bring awareness. And and the best project of all, the Senator Negron's reservoir, is just getting started.
Right.
And it's funded, the federal government is funding it. The Trump administration funded money. The Biden administration has funded money. Representative Mast has done an amazing job on that. We have everybody on board. Governor DeSantis has been really solid on this.
Yes.
And so we have everybody on board to make these things happen. But just what we've seen, the progress of the work that's been done already, the Calkins, for example, the Calkins Water Farm, the C-44 reservoir. I mean, these things, because it's not just a reservoir, it's storm treatment areas. And they are doing such good. And the other thing it's doing, it's putting water back into the ground. Which drinking water, if you look at California, they're out of water.
That's right.
So we don't have that problem. We could if we weren't doing projects like this. And speaking of drinking water, I'd like to bring something up if I could.
Absolutely.
So the city of Stuart is doing, right now, we're under construction, what I think is the most important project that the city's done in 50 years, and that's our alternative water supply. Due to we discovered almost every water utility in the country has discovered there's a contaminant called PFAS and PFOAs, and we discovered ours, and we have had at the time a public works and utilities director that said, not in my town, and he really did the research and pushed us to come up with a way to make sure we have the cleanest water possible. And so we took immediate mitigation issues, but with the help of the state, Representative Overdorf helped get us $1.7 million in appropriations with certain special revolving loan funds that are out there with other grants. We are doing an alternative water supply where our wells will, instead of coming from less than 200 feet down, will be coming from like 1,600 feet down.
Wow.
And then they'll be going through a reverse osmosis filtration system, which is what's being built right now. The wells have been drilled. And when this is done, we are going to have the cleanest, best water, some of the best water, not only in the country, but possibly in the world. And I'm very excited about it. It's all in through the whole process. I think we're at like 17 billion now.
Okay.
But I think in the end it's going to be about 40.
Okay.
And this is a 50, 75, 100-year project to ensure that we have clean, safe drinking water.
That is huge.
And I think that's one of the most important things that we do.
Yes.
And I think that at the end of the day, this is what government is supposed to be doing.
Right.
And And at the same time, we're keeping our rates, which they have gone up, as with everything.
Right, everything has.
But we're keeping our rates in line with other water utilities in the area while doing these upgrades and expansions.
So is this strictly for the city, or is the whole state working on this?
Well, there is state legislation, but as far as there is actually state legislation being worked on regarding the PFAS, but from a perspective of our utility, each individual utility is independently operated.
Okay.
And we are so far ahead of everybody. I think a lot of water companies will be looking at these type of systems.
Following your lead and example.
Exactly.
Well, Commissioner McDonald, appreciate you, and Mayor now, appreciate you coming into the studio. We have just a few minutes. Again, the ZIP, the Zoning in Progress, there's going to be a public workshop November 2nd right there at the City Hall. And super important, folks. And also, I think for properties that are already in process, already have their application in, they're kind of grandfathered in. Is that correct?
Anybody had an application in which there's not many right now, but if any, there might be one or two.
Okay.
The reality is, the economy, the cost of money is in a slow development down more than we can.
Cost of materials went up, and inflation and interest rates.
Money, interest rates, that is really going to slow down in the immediate future. So that's going to have a bigger effect than anything we do.
100%. But you'll go through this in your 90 days, possibly 180 days, and then everybody's going to know where they stand and what the land uses are. So I think that's kind of a big thing that's really happened here since the election. And over your tenure here, it might be one of the, you've went over the comp plan before, and I think that's one of the things you're looking at is there was a parking issue with a half a unit.
Well, that's there was one of the issues we are looking at, something that was passed, again, when I was not there, and it's not so much a parking issue. It was, to me, it was a transparency issue. They wanted to come up with a way to do smaller units and encourage that, and less expensive units. So the city commission created where in the urban downtown area in the CRA, you could do units that were under 900 square feet would be called a half a unit. And then ones from 900 to 1,100 would be called 3/4 a unit. The reason I never liked this, and I'm really glad that we have the will
ZIP.
now to change
Right.
it, is that it was you could do something 900 square foot a unit, but you'd call it 29 units an acre, or 30 units an acre, but you could have, if they're all under 900 square feet, you could have 60 units, and people can count,
right?
And so there's that. Plus, they made the units too big,
right?
I think there could be a density bonus for small units, but they must be much smaller and a much less of a bonus.
We got just 30 seconds left, but absolutely. My parking was, I think that at 900 it was considered half a unit, so you had two apartments for one.
That wasn't quite accurate, though.
Okay.
There was a parking calculation for it.
Got it. Okay, Commissioner Troy McDonald, Mayor McDonald, thank you so much for coming in. City of Stuart, next week we're going to have Commissioner Collins in the studio. Take care. We'll see you then.